President Trump's hush money trial suddenly erupting. There was a heated moment. All right, I'm going to show it to you in Sketch Artist. Courtroom sketch artist Elizabeth Williams captured this. She's my guest in just a moment. Let me tell you what you're looking at. This is Trump and his lawyers and what they were doing when prosecutors made the case to admit text messages, plural, into evidence related to the Karen McDougal hush money payment, including one from National Enquirer editor Dylan Howard. So this text message gets put out there. It was in 2016, and the text message from this editor to an immediate family member, quote, "At least if he wins, I'll be pardoned for election fraud." Now, Trump and his team were visibly upset by this text. One of Trump's lawyers shouted, "Whoa!" Out front now, Elizabeth Williams, a sketch artist who was in the courtroom with Trump today and, of course, has been throughout this trial. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that text conversation. The judge has not decided whether to admit that text into evidence. The jury was not in the room when this was put out there. Exactly. But you were there. The lawyers were there. Trump was there. What happened?
Well, the contrast, because Trump has been pretty staid throughout this trial. Mm-hmm. He's been head facing forwards or slightly to the witness. That information came out. The three of them, Trump and his two lawyers, they all sit back. They start immediately conferring amongst one another. It was a visible difference because throughout most of the testimony this morning, I think Trump kind of expects and he sort of knows what's coming. Those were totally unexpected. And he really reacted. He was talking to Blanche, and then he was talking to Beauvais, and then back at Blanche again, and Blanche, and then the three of them. I can't draw motion, but there was a lot of that.
Which is fascinating. And again, we don't know whether that text is going to be admitted into evidence for the jury. And the jury doesn't know about it. They've been told not to watch the media. So, presumably they're following that. They're not going to know about it unless it's admitted. All right, so there's another sketch when you talk about how Trump's demeanor, has been sort of staid was the word you just used, right? Okay, so here's Trump watching and listening as Pecker's on the witness stand today, and so that's what you're capturing. You see Judge Merchan, of course, as well. So what stood out to you the most about Pecker's testimony today?
First of all, this is the cross-examination of his attorney of Pecker, and they're now talking about the election, the Arnold Schwarzenegger National Enquirer.
Right, they're trying to draw a parallel that Arnold did it, and so it's all the same, right?
It's all the same, that this happens, and Donald Trump is very interested in this, and he starts turning around like I've never seen him. He turns around, and he tries to put his arm in the back of the chair. He looks certainly in the direction of the jury. I was looking. I was trying to see.
So it looks there in your picture. That's his attorney, but it's the jury there.
And then he didn't keep his arm there long enough for me to draw him, but he definitely wanted to see if that jury was listening, and are they going to react, or what do they think this is important? Because it was finally some testimony that favored him and his case. So he was very interested in that. And I haven't seen him do that since the beginning of this trial. And by the way, didn't see him, have that kind of body language during E. Jean Carroll's case either. He thought that he really, it seemed to me by his body language, he thought he scored one. So.
Sorry, scored one. All right. Well, we shall see. And thank you so much. Always good to see you.
Bryn, let's talk more about what the scene was like inside the courtroom today.
Yeah, listen, I found it interesting, the contrast between the finishing up of the direct and the cross-examination, right? Direct, we have seen over the last couple of days, it's very methodical. They go through every single detail, pulling back the curtain on those catch and kill schemes with Pecker, bringing in the evidence, text messages, how they discuss signal apps with Michael Cohen. And then once we got to the cross, it was rapid fire, right? The defense was basically walking him through exactly poking holes into what the cross had just spent days and hours doing with Pecker. So I found that very interesting. Another thing I thought was so interesting, and you just mentioned your interviews that you did. Also, what was brought up, of course, was the Access Hollywood tape and all these details that very likely these jurors have heard prior to the 2016 election. They were extremely enthralled. We were learning that, they were ping-ponging back and forth between the questions that were being asked and Pecker's answers. So that was interesting. Meanwhile, the former president sort of sat back, particularly during Pecker's direct, he sort of sat back with his arms crossed at times, kind of closing his eyes, listening in a little bit more, but really not reacting much at all to what his former friend was saying on the stand just feet away from him. So there was a lot of sort of, quiet drama in a sense inside the courtroom, but you could certainly feel it.
I just want to get quick takes from everybody about what stood out. I mean, Ellie, what stood out to you?
So for the reason Bryn's saying, prosecutors know you do not high five at the end of direct exam. That's the easy part. And the change in pace and tone that Bryn noted, I think, was interesting. And I do think the defense has started to score some points and chip away at Pecker's testimony. For example, they established this catch and kill stuff, this capturing stories, doing favors for celebrities, putting pressures on celebrities. Donald Trump did not invent that. That's been going on since the beginning of tabloid journalism. That's important context for the jury to understand. Michael Cohen, I think they scored a nice point when they established Michael Cohen is always playing an angle for himself. They got that out of the state's witness, out of the DA's witness. And the last thing I think was there's a contradiction in an important part of Pecker's testimony where he says now that Hope Hicks was at this crucial meeting where they first started discussing this plan. But it turns out he didn't say that the first time he was asked by investigators. Now, I'm not saying he's ruined as a witness, but this is the back and forth. I think he did a good job on direct. I'd be happy with it if I was the prosecutor. But now sit back because now he's taking on some damage.
Yeah, speaking from my time as a prosecutor, I agree. I think I would be happy if this were my witness. I think what stands out is something we talked about the other night, actually, is that it's quite easy to point the finger at someone else. But I think what happened today is that Pecker pointed the finger at himself. He basically admitted that he was part of a criminal conspiracy. And he talked importantly about election crimes and his own concern that exactly what they were doing violated that.
He actually had raised concerns and said they sought out legal counsel on that at the time.
Exactly. And I think that's incredibly damaging because one of the competing narratives here is, are we talking about a personal matter and this hush money, which is what everyone does, it's what rich people do to hide stories, Are we talking about a campaign violation? Are we talking about people entering into conspiracy because they know they are trying to influence an election? And that is at the core of the prosecution's case. And today, David Pecker said that's exactly what was going on.
Arthur, what stood out to
From
you?
what I heard about, and Ellie, I believe he's absolutely correct, you know, the cross-examination, they made some points right out of the box. And the way you described it, Britton, going like boom, 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 that's what you want. And you only get one chance to make a first impression on this jury. This is the first big cross-examination. You want the jurors to know right off the bat, you're gonna hear all these nice, prepared, totally rehearsed, direct examinations, but watch what happens. Watch what happens. Watch how we fillet that once we dig into the details. And apparently, I had a friend who was in the courtroom. He said after the first hour and a half of cross-examination, I wanted to take a shower after hearing how filthy that tabloid industry is. And he really, I don't know the details, but apparently there was a lot about Arnold Schwarzenegger and when he was going to run and all the things that they buried with him.
Right. Pecker was testifying that Arnold Schwarzenegger had actually been in contact with him about essentially doing the same kind of catch and kill sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think I made the analogy today. They're like, well, what's the big deal about bringing that out? If a jury is there and they're listening to a crime and there's someone's like talking about how horrible double parking is, but then you have like 18 other people, well, I double park and you double park and you double park. This kind of slides into that jury nullification basket. Like, so this is standard operating procedure. This isn't like Donald Trump is the only one who's ever done this. They're like, oh, this is what all politicians do? They pay to bury stories or have someone in the tabloid help them?
Jessica, for you?
I was just going to pick up on that point, though, which is to say one of the things that's significant about establishing that AMI did this for lots of other people is it tends to negate the idea that this was done for an election purpose, right? If they're catching and killing stories for lots of other celebrities,
Although
even
Schwarzenegger
politicians-
was running for governor. This was in
right,
advance
but
of his
Mark
run.
Wahlberg wasn't, right? I mean, there are other people for whom Pecker was saying we would do this. And so I think at the end of the day, Pecker was still a very effective witness for the prosecution. And I think there's lots of answers to this. And he talked about how when we got close to the election for President Trump, that the concern that Trump expressed was about the effect on his campaign. But nevertheless, I think establishing that this was sort of standard operating procedure normalizes it, makes it seem arguably like it's less related to the campaign itself, which is important. But overall, I thought he was an excellent witness. And also, significantly, he showed no bias toward Trump. I mean, not only was he not deflecting responsibility for his own criminal conduct, but he was saying that he still considered the former president a friend.
Yeah, he didn't come off sounding like he had an axe to
No, he wasn't holding anything back, and he had no axe to grind.
Jeff?
If I were Donald Trump, I would be so happy about what happened in Washington today. I wouldn't even care what happened in the courtroom today because I think the Supreme Court really signaled that we are not going to see any other trials this year. We'll get to that later tonight, I know. But the value to the prosecution of Pecker is that he laid out the frame of this story. You know, now the jury understands that there were these three witnesses, 3 paid. You know, that is all going to be filled out. Maybe they'll believe it, maybe they won't. You know, your idea that this is so terrible and you know, this is just business as usual. Who was their partner in all of this? Donald Trump. You don't think the jury's going to be somewhat offended that this guy who's running for president of the United States is involved with all these sleazeballs?
That he buried a sex story, which you heard from their witness. So did this celebrity, so did that celebrity, so did this celebrity, so did that celebrity, so did this celebrity. That it happens all the time. It's not this unique, oh my God, they came out. This isn't Watergate. That's my point. That Watergate was a very unique time. It's the first time something like that has ever happened. What came out in cross-examination is this happens all the time.